Okay, I'm here doing one of my grilled interviews. It's going to be with fredy122 of Against All Authority. So hello.
Hello.
Okay, so when I looked into your career, basically like the first period anyone will have heard of you in the European scene will be like with Eclipsia, some online tournaments there. Being as you're from the UK and most of that team was from like other countries, etc., except for I think there was one player from the UK as well. Like, how did you actually get into that team? Was that like your first real competitive team?
I played in the past in a team with ShLaYa and Krepo and Yellowpere before, but
LCS wasn't it?
yeah, LCS, and we didn't get anywhere. We got close, and I kind of stopped playing the game a bit and focused on studies and things. But ShLaYa asked me. ShLaYa was going to join Eclipsia with a new team, and he asked me if I could play in a LAN with him, and I said yeah, okay, sure. And from then on, that's how I got into Eclipsia, and then the lineup changed a bit, and I even swapped roles later on. But yeah, that's how it started.
Okay. Because one thing I noticed that's quite interesting is when you got into Against All Authority, and you went to this Paris Games Week LAN, the interesting thing is the team that actually beat you there, GSU, all four of their members are actually now your four current teammates in Against All Authority. Like, was playing against them there like a catalyst for you getting into their team? I know like a couple of them only just joined recently into this team now, but was that like anything to do with how you then got into their team?
Not really. I think I only had close links with ShLaYa in the past, and we wanted to be in a team together again. And he said that these people are good, so we ended up trying them. And then eventually Dioud came in later as well. Just because you need links really to get in a good team. You need links, and Dioud had links with ShLaYa and Nono, and that's how it happened. It's just a coincidence. It wasn't planned. So yeah.
Since the four of them have played together before, and now they're all the four surrounding you in this team now, and they've just brought the other two in like in the last couple of months, is it the case that like the chemistry between the four of them was really good from the old team, and that's why they brought these two guys in now? Was it not so good with the guys you had before, like Linak, and I forget who the other one was?
Yeah, I think the Virtual was brought in the LCS qualifier kind of as a panic pick, because we had 2 days to find a pick, so well, pick him. At least we've played with him before, at least some of us have. Yeah, I think they have good chemistry together, just from playing with each other before, and I'm just kind of, I'm growing into them, kind of, and yeah. Always playing together in the past always gives you good chemistry with each other.
Since the four of them were in a team before and you played against them and now you're in their team, like, are you very different from the guy they had at the top lane before? Like, how does your style fit with their style?
I think the guy they had before didn't have quite the level to play at LCS.
So in what sense? What makes you think that?
I don't think he had like the kind of team play. He was French, but the champion pool as well. And they actually asked me to join their team before that, but I didn't want to. I have a more aggressive style than the previous top laner they had in their old team. I have a bigger champion pool, I think, and yeah, just generally more knowledge, because I was playing the game for quite a long time, a competitive play, even though people didn't really know me. So yeah.
If we look at the team that you have at the moment, like obviously the other four of them are all French, and like from what I've heard from listening to some interviews of them, some of them have like good English, some of them have like not so good. Like in terms of actual in-game communication in League of Legends, if you look around Europe, there are actually a lot of teams that have all communication English, and some of them don't have any English players. Some of them are like one from Lithuania, one from Sweden. So obviously it seems like in League of Legends, communication isn't like, you don't have to be super precise to get the point across. Like when you actually play with them, is it just like very short things that you're saying to each other? How in depth can you go when you're actually in the moment of the game?
Yeah, usually you just say short things, and since everyone has a really high skill level, you know, if someone says, let's do dragon, you know what to do. Maybe you're going to push your lane and then come dragon. It's just basic game knowledge, and then you say a few words, you give information, and then people are going to know what to do at this level. So communication, they're for French people, but in game it's not a problem. It's harder out of game, talking to each other about the game, when you have to give more detail, but yeah, in game it's easy.
Does it ever lead to any issues with like someone like shot calling in the middle of the game, something that you haven't thought of?
Yeah, it can do sometimes, but it's just situational, really. It depends what's going on in the game.
Is it 100% English communication in the team? Do they ever, like, if they talk about something that doesn't have to include you, do they ever talk in French to each other?
They tell me the important things, like if they're winning bot lane, it's important that I know that they're winning bot lane. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, if they're getting ganked or something in bot lane, for example, they will maybe talk in French, because they don't have to translate it. It's easier for them, and they, you know. So yeah, but that's the only time. In team fights, we try to talk English all the time. Yeah.
In the past, at least, of the meta of League of Legends, like the top laner to some degree could be sort of left on an island a bit, just to 1v1. Does it make it easier in terms of communication in that sense, that you don't need as much given to you or whatever? Because I mean, nowadays people often say it's more like a 2v1 meta. What do you think about that?
I think you don't need to communicate as much as, for example, mid or the jungle. So yeah, that's definitely true to an extent. Top lane now is kind of you're an island almost. You do have the 2-on-1s that makes a difference, but if you play 1-on-1, you're more kind of playing your own game and just 1-on-1, and yeah, it's more of a safe game top. That wasn't the case in Season 2, but in Season 3 that's the case.
So, I mean, talking about this topic then, 2v1ing and playing the top lane now, because people often say now the problem is, like, anyone who's a really good 1v1 top player, people are just going to camp him, or they're going to specifically try and gank him early on. What is your synergy like with your jungler, Virtual? I mean, do you have is there any special setup for you in that sense, or do they just leave you there until there's a problem? How do you work it in your team?
Usually I tell him, if I want him to come to my lane, I'll tell him, but I don't usually tell him just because of the meta right now. But yeah, I definitely, one of our weaknesses is me and Virtual. We need to work on our synergy a bit more, and communication, that's for sure. In the 2-on-1 lanes, it's different. Like, he will come top and he has to cover my lane, and that's when we have to be really communicated a lot more, because the jungler is really important for top lane in those cases.
With it being the case that some teams, especially if they know their opponent has a strong top lane, they're going to specifically try and 2v1 him at some point or take him out of his game in that sense. Like, how, from your perspective, do you balance, like, calling for help and, like, knowing when, like, you know, I might need help, but actually maybe the team has a different objective here and I should just try and go even or play more passive? Like, how do you balance that out, like, to judge it?
Usually I tell Virtual that a lot of the time the jungler is coming to cover top, make sure the tower doesn't die and make sure you don't get 3-on-1 dive. So, but a lot of the time I tell Virtual, come top unless you have something better to do. So, for example, ganking mid might be a better idea, or diving bottom, and in that case I just have to adapt my playstyle. Like, if Virtual's not there and I think I might be getting dived, I just have to back up, and yeah, it just depends. It's really situational, but that's what I tell Virtual. If there's nothing better to do, come cover me top in the 2-on-1 lane.
Since not so, your team, even though like some of the French guys like ShLaYa, etc., have been in quite a few teams over the years, they don't have the same star power names as some of the other guys in LCS, obviously. So I've actually, when I've looked into like people talking about your team, a lot of people say, "Oh, Fredy just carries from the top. Like he's the star player of the team." Is there any merit to that? Like, is that how your team's organised?
I think me and Nono are doing a lot of the, in terms of actually carrying the game. I think we're the ones who are actually going to carry. ShLaYa has his strength. He's more of a support AP player. He's not a Froggen. He doesn't completely carry games, but he does what he needs to do to let other people carry around him. And I think it's an underrated trait, really. And yeah, it's harder to carry from top lane right now, of course, because of the 2-on-1. So yeah.
I mean, one of the difficult things I would imagine about playing in Europe is that Europe's famous for such strong mid players. And if we look at a lot of these teams, all the top teams basically have like an elite tier mid guy. And the guys who don't, who are doing okay, so someone like Ocelot, for example, he's playing maybe more like what you're describing there, like playing more for the team fights and stuff, and he knows he's not going to win his lane necessarily against Froggen or Alex Ich or something. What is it like for your team in terms of trying to compete against the mid? Like, is the mid really strong in the meta at the moment in Europe?
Yeah, I think the mid lane is probably the most important lane and the strongest lane and the easiest lane to carry from.
Why do you think it's the most important then?
Yeah, because you pick the AoE champs, that's one thing. You have the champs that can carry, but you're never usually in a 2-on-1 lane as well. You're guaranteed to get a solo lane. You're guaranteed to be able to farm all game. So yeah, you're going to get all the farm and you're going to do a lot of damage. And
I mean, is it difficult for your team in terms of how you set it up in that sense? Like, do you have it a bit like what I was saying about Ocelot there? You make ShLaYa play more towards the team fights and stuff and with his champion picks, or does he try to go even in lane? Like, what's the mentality knowing how strong the other teams are at mid, you know?
Yeah. We, for example, last game we played Cardis in the mid lane, so he just has to draw the lane and he almost wins it in that sense if he draws the lane with Cardis. And we're playing these kind of champs like Orianna and Lux to fit his playstyle, and also they're strong in lane, so he doesn't lose the lane. It's just that ShLaYa probably won't win the lane straight out, but it's fine. We work around it.
Since it is like a very famous stereotype that everyone says, okay, Europe has like the strongest mids, or let's put it like this: the best players in Europe tend to be the mid players, like the stars of their team, etc. How much of that do you think is the fact that those players are just like really good individual players, and how much is it like the chicken and the egg thing? Like the team's already decided, like we're going to have our mid be our star, and that's how the teams fit. Like, what do you think the balance between the two is from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think the all-star players are usually the mid laners, and the rest of the team fits around them. The mid laner usually picks a champion, and the team, or wants to play a champion, and the team will probably fit strong champs around it. Yeah, like I said, it's just right now in Season 3, it's the safest lane. You're guaranteed to get farm. It's hard to actually win or lose the lane right now. So yeah, if you have a good mid laner, who can do better than the other mid laner with equal farm, then yeah, your team's gonna have a real advantage in games.
On a similar topic, if we look at the top teams in Europe at the moment, nearly all of them have their two-star players tend to be the top laner and the mid at the moment. I mean, you can just go down the list. It's like it seems to certainly be the case. Maybe not so much with Gambit in comparison to some of the others. Like, where do you see the top lane in terms of strength at the moment? You were saying before, like, it's hard to carry from the top lane. How do you see these other teams in terms of like the best ones, the top laners there?
I think the top laners right now, that everyone's really good in top lane. They're all strong laners, but it's hard to pick one from another because of the 2-on-1 meta, and also you're kind of building around your team. Because you're not sure if you're going to get a solo lane, so you're just picking strong champions and building a comp around your team, not necessarily champs, so they're going to carry the game. And for example, Darian, he's picking like Shen, he's just picking the strongest champs and being a safe champion. And I think that's the best way to play top lane now. You just pick the strong champion and you support your team, and you just be a tank and a bruiser, and you let your team do a lot of the work.
Okay, that's interesting, because I mean, a lot of the most popular top lane guys, so guys like Wickd, or from America, someone like Voyboy, they're so famous and loved by their fans because they're so aggressive and they're going for 1v1 kills, etc. But obviously now there's also a lot of other players, like Dyrus from TSM, and these big guys are playing more like you're saying, like tanks and stuff, and more passive style, and trying to just sort of go even, or like what is the balance in terms of how you approach the top lane at the moment in light of this? Like, did you used to play a different style before? Now you've changed it to now. What do you think?
I generally try to pick the strongest champs, a bit like Darian, the strongest laners. So you're always safe in lane. You never need help, and you can be an island, as you said. But yeah, you can still pick champs to carry, but it's risky. It can go wrong if you pick, for example, a champ like a Kali, and then you get 2-on-1, and the other guy in the bottom lane he's just a tank. He doesn't need farm. He doesn't need farm to do his job, whereas with a Kali you probably need farm, and yeah, things like that.
So with the whole all-star vote thing recently, that put like a lot of attention onto the two of the top laners from Europe, obviously, sOAZ and Wickd, and people were arguing backwards and forwards, who's better, whatever. Thinking of these two players, since you've now got a chance to play them a bunch of times in LCS, how do you personally match up against each of these two players, sOAZ and Wickd? Like, what are the difficulties of playing them? Do you have an advantage in any area or any of them? What do you think?
I think sOAZ is a lot stronger at the moment than Wickd, but that's
why do you think?
I think he's more consistent, okay. But also because his team is doing a lot better, it's easier to do better. But yeah, sOAZ, I think he's the only one who's killed me straight up 1-on-1 in the LCS. Wickd not so much, but yeah, he just feels a little more aggressive, a little more consistent, and yeah, and his champion pool is bigger as well. You never really know what sOAZ is going to pick, but Wickd, you can kind of predict his champion picks.
So if we take that as sOAZ is the best at the moment in your opinion, so if we talk about the others, so say Wickd, Kevin, these guys, When you play against them, just from an individual point of view, not like how the teams are doing, you feel like you do well against them. You know, do you have like I don't want to say you're better than them, but I mean, obviously they have, to a fan, they have the name power, okay? So they're always going to think, oh, he must be better than that guy. But I mean, in terms of just skills and how things are right now, how close is it, do you think, between you and those guys?
I think it's actually really, really close between me and them. Usually who wins the lane comes down to a matchup, or the champion matchup. Yeah, I think Darian is underrated, in my opinion, because he plays more for the team.
Oh, okay. Can you give me like an example that comes to mind when you think of that? Like, what does he do for his team that the other guys who maybe more 1v1 don't do necessarily?
He's picking things, just like he picks the strong champions in lane. He doesn't get, I don't think Diamond ganks his lane at all. If he does, not a lot. He does his tanking role really well. I think he's underrated overall.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, you're saying he's underrated then. Do you feel like... So we've picked, okay, sOAZ at the top at the moment. Like, where do the rest rank out? Like, who do you favour out of the others for whatever criteria you prefer at top lane? Who are like the guys who really spring to your mind first?
I think after sOAZ, it's probably going to be Wickd and Darian. And then I think me and sOAZ are really close in level to them as well.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So, I mean... Because I've heard, for example, when I did an interview with Ocelot, I mean, I know he's known to sort of big up his teammates, but he was trying to tell me that he thinks Kevin is better than Boy from America. Curse, he was trying to give it as an example of how great this guy is. Perhaps, I mean, you think like you and the sOAZ guy are better than him? Or stronger, or whatever?
I don't think so. It's not just about one-on-one power, it's also about your knowledge of the game, and I think that's somewhere where maybe me and sOAZ need to improve compared to someone like Kevin, who's been playing a longer time. But yeah, straight one-on-one, who knows who's going to win? It depends on the matchup. I think everyone can beat everyone with the right champions in top lane right now.
An interesting thing while we're still talking about the top players in Europe here is that some people who have only been following LCS, and I know some Americans don't watch European stuff at all, maybe they watch a little bit of LCS, they probably might not know this, but at the tier just below LCS, there's still some quite strong top laners in other teams. So we've got guys like Zaxxus, got Angush, Kubon. These guys, like, they don't have the star power names, you know, but we've seen like at IEMs they've done well at these amateur tournaments. What do you make of these guys? Like, who are the ones who are the stronger ones out of them? Like, how close are these guys to the top tier guys, etc.? Because, I mean, obviously you can be a very good player, but your team might not be in LCS, you know?
Yeah, I would say Kubon is probably the strongest of all those. Angush is also really good, but yeah, it's hard to say individually. It really depends how the team is doing. So.
What makes you say that they're the stronger then? Like, do they have some particular strengths that stand out when you've played them or watched them?
I haven't played versus them enough to say what.
Okay.
But I mean, their team's doing better, so their team's doing better than the other teams, so they must have some kind of strengths, whether it be knowledge or whether they're actually winning their lane and things like this.
Are you someone who actually watches like the NA LCS? Do you watch any like the OGN in Korea? Do you watch these other leagues at all?
No, I don't watch much of them. Oh. Only the occasional game, but not consistently.
Ah, okay. So is there any reason why then? Because I know some players from different regions, they like to watch the others to try and like see what matchups they're coming up with, like the Koreans especially, see if they're doing anything interesting. Do you don't think that's too important?
Yeah, the Koreans, I think you can learn a lot from watching the Koreans. I watch some games from the Koreans, but the Americans, it's hard. Like in European LCS, all the bans and picks are different depending on who you're playing, slightly varying. It's not really beneficial for me to watch the NA LCS consistently because all the teams are different. I don't know what their mains are. I don't know who their favorite champions or what they don't like to play against. So because they're not at the level in NA that they are in Korea. So it's not really beneficial to watch NA LCS, I think.
Who are the Korean guys who like you think are either really good or have some really interesting ideas? Like, who comes to mind there? Who do you like?
I like Makun because
yeah.
I used to play on him when I used to play versus him when I used to play on NA back a long time ago. Little Bulls as well. For a similar reason. I think they stand out and they're just really experienced and I like that.
For LCS, obviously one of the interesting things about the league is that you play games almost every single week, but at the same time it's always best of one. And so we've seen quite a lot of upsets in both of the NA and the European LCS, where like the bottom four teams somehow beat one of the top four, whereas in a big tournament people would have said, you know, that'll never happen. How much of this format, like the regular season at least, do you think comes down to kind of like trick strategies or something really surprising, as opposed to, you know, if you played a best of three, people maybe would be playing more like standard strategies and just trying to do their default style?
Yeah, it's happened before. Fnatic pulled a really good one versus EG with a blitzcrank top and these kind of strategies. They can work, but they only really work on a one-off if they do work. So yeah, the strategies definitely vary a lot more than if it was a best of three.
From the way the season's played out at the moment, I mean, the biggest surprise for most people would probably be like EG being all the way down in fourth. Some people might have thought maybe they'll even be like as high as second with Gambit on top. Do you think, based on what you're saying there, then it's not all just trick plays when the lesser teams win? So do you think this season's actually been like an accurate portrayal of how good EG is at the moment?
At the moment, yeah, I think it is, because I think everyone improved a lot since Season 2. Like, all the teams around them, all the teams below them, I think they've got a lot better. And EG are in a bit of a slump, I would say, at the moment. I think Season 3 didn't really help them. It hurt their play style a lot. So they almost have to relearn parts of the game. And I think that hurt them a lot this season, but I think they deserve to be fourth, and SK deserve to be third, for sure, above them.
What do you make of SK's season then? Because I think in reverse, people were expecting SK to probably be like fourth or maybe even lower, and so people have been a bit surprised that they've come third. They've had some good wins over some of the other teams. Like, what do you make of how they've managed to like turn it around?
I think the style, the LCS style, suits them, and I think they do a lot of research before games. I'm not sure, but I think they do. Yeah, they just play consistently, especially against the lower teams. That's where they're really consistent. I think EG have lost a lot of games to lower teams, whereas SK not so much. And yeah, if they can beat all the lower teams, but EG aren't, then that's why they're third, I think.
Before the LCS actually started, so before you even got to Cologne, etc., did your team ever used to practice Gambit online when they were Moscow 5 or anything?
Not unless we run into them in ranked queue. We never practice versus Gambit.
Because I saw in another interview someone else had done, someone said from another one of the big teams actually that they'd never practiced Gambit online before. And so the interesting thing I want to ask you about is when you see like people complain that the advantage the Asians have is that they have so many amazing teams and they all practice all the time, etc. The weird thing is Gambit's the team out of the rest of the world that's still doing sort of as well as the Asians, almost like at that sort of level, and yet no one really, at least publicly I've seen, has any clue like how do they practice, like who do they practice against, how much? Like, do you have any insight into this? Do you have any idea?
I don't know how they practice because we still don't scrim them. I think they only scrim the top teams. Maybe they scrim EG and Fnatic. I'm not sure. They might even scrim the Koreans, but they definitely have a secret training program that no one else has. I don't know how they're doing it.
In terms of during the LCS season, one of the things that people were expecting would be a big advantage was all the teams who came to Cologne and got a gaming house. Because we've all heard because of the Koreans have these gaming houses and they can practice all the time. Like on that level, it sounded like it'd be really good, like all the team would get to know each other. But then also, you'd think it would be an advantage that you don't have to get a flight in every single week. And yet actually, Gambit at the moment is like currently like top of the league and they're the ones flying in every single week. And some of the other teams, like EG for example, they have a gaming house. It's not going so well. Like how... Do you think people overestimated how crucial it was to have the gaming house in Cologne? Like, what has your own experience been like?
I think it's not as great as people think. The gaming house, you have the problems like you have to cook together, for example. You have to do chores as well, whereas you probably don't have to do that at home. So you still lose time. The time that they have to fly in is the time we have to spend cooking and washing our clothes and things like this. So yeah, and. Well, some people might not like each other enough to live together as well. That's also a problem. Not in our team, but yeah. I think a gaming house is definitely overrated, but it can be helpful. I think it depends on the team.
My background before League of Legends and StarCraft, etc., was actually in Counter-Strike, another 5v5 game. And the difficult things for teams from Western Europe in terms of getting to the top, because the top of the scene was always these teams from Scandinavia. And the problem was, because their internet was so good, they only tended to practice versus each other, okay? So if you were from like the UK or Germany, it was really hard to get games against them. And what would tend to happen was the teams who were a tier below the top teams, would just play each other, and then maybe one or two could just sort of bridge the gap and then get into that top group and get practice there. From what you're saying here, it sounds like even if you're in LCS, you can't necessarily just practice anyone you want in Europe. Like, it's still difficult to schedule stuff. How difficult is it when you're one of those teams trying to break into the top 3 or 4 or whatever, like to actually get the experience to get into that level beyond just the official games?
I don't think it's that hard. I think it's only Gambit who don't train versus the lower teams. We play versus EG, we play versus SK and Fnatic. So I think we are kind of an elite group, if you want. We scrim a lot more together than we scrim outside teams. Every LCS team, I think.
Wow, okay.
It's a lot harder for teams lower to get a scrim, because we don't want to play teams that we're just going to stomp, and they don't want to get stomped, and yeah, it's harder for them to improve.
What's interesting between the two regions, the NA LCS and the EU LCS, is when people first looked at the teams who'd made it into each one. So in Europe, people thought, okay, so it's going to be like Fnatic, Gambit, and EG are going to be like the powerhouses, and then SK and the others, it's sort of like, don't know how well they'll do. And so they actually thought that it would be like a very distinct top 3 and like no one would be challenging them at all. Meanwhile, over in America, where people thought like, oh no, these big teams will just dominate as well, there's actually been like a lot more parity between some of the teams below, like in the middle, like the 4, 5, 6 sort of spots. But the interesting thing is, when I looked at the amateur circuit in Europe, it actually seems like next season of LCS could be like way stronger, because like these teams I was mentioning before, I mean, Millennium just split up, but one of their players went to another team, I forget, Alternate, I think. So yeah, so we've got like Alternate looks very strong, we've got MYM's pretty decent, and Exis. These teams have all like, they look like the LCS caliber, and some of them are very likely to get into LCS next season. Like, as someone who's in one of the teams that's in the bottom 4 at the moment, like, assuming you stay in LCS, like, do you see next season being like even tougher from this perspective? Like, what did you make? Because some of the teams this season have got kind of stomped a bit.
Yeah, I think next season will definitely be harder. I think there'll be 1 or 2 teams coming up, probably MIM. It's not for sure, but yeah, these teams have a good chance of coming up. And the LCS teams now, we have all the time in the world to just play the game. People like MIM, they don't. So if they get the time because they qualify for LCS, they're going to improve a lot. And the same for Alternate as well. They're going to really improve if they get to LCS, but they have to actually get in first, and that's going to be the hard bit for them.
What do you actually think of the format where you have these like relegation elements? So if a team loses the playoff spot and then they have to like sort of win a series, I think, to get back into LCS, like how dangerous is it actually for a team like yours? Like, is it anything that's been concerning you at all?
Well, I've been looking at the bracket for the requalification if we don't qualify through the playoff, and yeah, it's kind of trying to avoid Alternate and MIM, but yeah, I think it's quite dangerous for us. We can't underestimate it. I think we have a really good chance of staying in the format, but at the same time, it's pretty easy to go out, and it's quite scary for us because we gave up so much to be here, and if we have to go home and we can't play LCS anymore, it's going to be really bad and for us. So it is quite scary.
If we look at all the teams in LCS, nearly all the teams on both continents who are doing really well are the teams who have like big star power names, or even if they're not so good, they still have like a big name player. And so if we look at your team might be the team who's doing the best out of all the ones who don't have a really big name. And so does this suggest that your team is better across the board? Do you have better team play than some of these other teams? What do you think it is that's allowing you to compete still, even though to fans at least you wouldn't have like a big all-star type name?
I think we have the skill level to be all-star players, some of us, but we just don't have the fan base. For example, I don't even have a Facebook page. But yeah, it's just that we don't have the fans to make us seem like we're all-star players, but we definitely have the skill level, all of us, to be an all-star player. So.
If we look at the UK scene, and so basically the only UK players most people even know is just Snoopeh, basically, and now some people know you from LCS, etc. Beyond that, the list gets pretty thin pretty quickly. I mean, you played with that guy, Hazard, was it, or something? Havoc. You played with him in Eclipsia. Yeah. There's been like a couple of other people, but like they're only really like playing in online tournaments. There's not really like offline experience, etc. Like, what's the UK scene like for League of Legends? Like, are there teams? Is everyone just playing solo queue? What's the problem?
I think I think they just don't. There's not the level there on most of the players. There's a few good UK players who are playing solo queue, but they're kind of team hopping. I think Havoc doesn't have a team anymore, for example, and yeah. I don't know. I don't see anyone upcoming who really in the UK scene, unless I don't know about someone. But I don't think there's going to be anyone new for a while in the UK.
So before you brought in Dioud, your team was 6-12 overall record. Since you brought him in, including today's match, where for anyone who's watching later, they beat EG today. You're actually 3-3 overall, and so it's much shorter data set, obviously, but the overall record's a lot better. What's changed in bringing him in? Like, was it him specifically? Was it something the other guy was doing that wasn't working out? What do you think's changed?
When we had Karalius in the team, we had a bad mood. That was the biggest thing for me. The team morale was kind of low because we had arguments in bot lane a lot, and yeah, Dioud brings something new. I think he's a bit more skillful than Karalius. But yeah, for me, it's just the team morale is so much higher, and we're more of a team than we were. We weren't really a team a few months ago. So it's, yeah.
You mentioned before, actually, this team LCS, and people most famously know it now because it had, I think, Snoopeh was in it, and Yellowpere and Krepo were in it. Yeah. All these guys from EG now. Like, obviously that was way back, a very different meta. Like, people didn't even play the same roles in the same lanes. But how good were those guys actually back then? Like, could you tell if some of them were going to become great players, or were they just okay players? What was it like?
I actually didn't think they would make it because I thought they were too passive. When I was playing in LCS, I thought they were way too passive as players, and you can kind of see it transition through here. They're still pretty passive, but I think the strength that I kind of underrated in them is they can keep a team together. They don't fight. They admit when they make mistakes. That's a huge part of being a League of Legends team. You need to be able to admit your mistakes and improve on it, and I think that's the biggest reason why they are where they are today.
From LCS, it would make it seem like, because of quite a few, for example, Giants, I think, have beaten Gambit like twice or something this season, so that would be like a big upset for a lot of people. Before LCS began, everyone thought, okay, like, maybe Gambit could lose to EG, or they could lose to Fnatic, but they're not going to lose to these bottom teams because they're so good in like the big LAN tournaments. I think they've ever come all fourth at one ever, and they usually only lose to like the elite level teams. Are you someone who does think that Gambit overall, when we get into like best of three type format, is like a step above everyone else? Like, how close is the top 2 or 3 there?
I think they do step it up a level when they play best of 3 in LAN tournaments. This is not. It's kind of almost exhibition matches for them, so they're very beatable here. And it's best of 1, like you said. Anything can happen. Someone can make a mistake, and the game can snowball from that. That's just the way a best of 1 works. But yeah, in best of 3, I think they turn it up a level that other teams don't quite have yet.
Do you think they have do they have something different from all the other top teams? Because even teams like, I mean, EG, when they were CLG, they were on sort of a comparable level. Like, they could perform against the world's best teams and sort of get to the deep stages. But since then, there hasn't really been any teams. Now that Fnatic lost like Reckles, there haven't really been any European teams who like really looked like they were going to win one of these big offline tournaments. Does Gambit have something special that the other Europeans don't have? Like, what do you put it down to, do you think?
I think they just have great team synergy overall. They all have like very high skill level. They all have the same language as well, and yeah, they're great in LAN events usually. So something inside of them, they just turn it up when they're in these high pressure situations. And in LCS, it's not so important for them, but in the World Championship matches, yeah, I think they're still the only European team that has a real chance against all the Korean teams still.
Okay, so for my final question, I always like to do sort of like a hypothetical imaginary scenario. And basically, I'm going to like tailor this one to you, okay? So since you have like knowledge of all these teams in LCS you've played, and a lot of fans might not know some of the players in the lower teams, if we imagine that there was some sort of all-star team of the teams from the top 4 teams, okay, so we've got SK, Fnatic, EG, Gambit, they have some all-star lineup. I want you to make an all-star lineup, but only using the bottom 4 teams. You can pick any players you want, but don't pick like everyone from your team. You can pick 1 or 2, you know, and you can have yourself in the team if you want. Like, what all-star team would you put together as to kind of show people, like, you know, these players are very good and they'd actually have a chance versus the top all-stars of the top 4? Who would you put together and why?
I think I would go with No, and probably Dioud in bot lane as well. So my bot lane, probably Samux for top lane. I think he's an aggressive player and he's pretty good. For mid lane, probably maybe Sushi actually.
Oh, okay, why?
I like his style and I think he can play well. And in jungle it would be for sure Modern. I think he's really underrated right now.
Okay. Why do you think he's underrated? Like, what stands out about his style?
Oh, well, he was the first player to play Elise, but in jungle, and he's really strong at Volibear. But because he lost when he was playing these games, and Diamond picked up Elise, and Diamond got a lot of the credit for it. But yeah, Modern is really strong.
And realistically, how close would this all-star team be to, you know, like the sOAZ, Diamond Prox, Alex Ich type all-star team?
I don't think it would win, but I'm sure it would be a game.
Oh, okay.
So a good game to watch at least.
Okay, do you have any final words, someone you want to thank or say hello to?
Well, just thanks to the sponsors, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, thanks.